The sewers beneath New York City smelled like they always did: diesel runoff, standing water, and the particular brand of decay that came from a million lives lived overhead without a thought for what ran beneath them. Leonardo moved through the tunnels on muscle memory, one hand trailing the curved shell of his katana handle, ears tuned to the drip and echo of the underground dark. Patrol was quiet tonight. Too quiet, in the way that usually meant something was about to go very wrong. Donatello had picked up the energy reading 3 hours ago. Electromagnetic pulses cycling in a pattern he couldn't explain, emanating from a section of tunnel so old it predated the city's own maintenance maps. He'd been talking about it ever since, a stream of technical speculation that Michelangelo had mostly ignored and Raphael had told him to shut up about twice. But Leonardo listened, because Donnie's instincts about strange technology had kept them alive more than once. What none of them expected was the ring. It stood in a natural stone chamber the tunnel opened into, a massive circle of what looked like carved gray metal, covered in symbols none of them recognized, leaning against the bedrock like it had been placed there with intention. Like it had been waiting. Chevrons lined its outer edge. A pedestal device sat beside it, crystalline surface faintly luminous in the darkness. "That," Donatello said quietly, flashlight beams sweeping the circumference, "is not a city maintenance structure." "Obviously," Raphael said. "Don, stay back," Leonardo ordered, moving forward anyway because that was the contradiction of leadership. You told others to be cautious while you went first. The symbols on the ring's surface were unlike anything in their collective experience. Not Egyptian. Not Greek. Older than both, and somehow familiar in the way that made no rational sense. What happened next happened fast. Donatello touched the pedestal. Not deliberately. His hand brushed it while he was reaching for his scanner, but the reaction was immediate. The chevrons lit in sequence, a grinding mechanical thunder filling the chamber, each lock slamming home with a sound like the world's heaviest deadbolt. A vortex of blue-white energy coashed outward from the ring's center, and all four of them dove for the walls on pure reflex. The unstable wormhole stabilized into a shimmering vertical pool that cast pale light across the stone walls and their stunned green faces. "What did you do?" Raphael demanded. "I barely touched it." "Go through?" Michelangelo asked, already sounding interested. Leonardo had approximately 4 seconds to make a decision, because the chamber was beginning to vibrate in a way that suggested the energy cycle wasn't sustainable. He looked at the gate. He looked at his brothers. He thought about Master Splinter, who had taught him that hesitation in the critical moment was its own kind of failure. "Together," he said, and they went through. The sensation of gate travel was nothing any human language had developed adequate vocabulary for, because no human had experienced it before. Samantha Carter wrote 9 pages of technical documentation trying to describe the dematerialization and rematerialization process in terms that didn't sound like a fever dream. For the turtles, it lasted less than a second and felt like being disassembled at the atomic level and reassembled somewhere else, cold and disoriented, on a metal floor with armed soldiers screaming at them from every direction. The SGC gate room was loud. "Freeze! Hands where we can see them! Do not move!" 8 P90s were trained on them. The iris had failed to close in time. Whatever had dialed from the New York end had used an address not in the system, and the gate tech on duty had hesitated 1 critical second too long. Now 4 large, green, heavily armed humanoid figures crouched on the ramp in defensive postures while alarms screamed through Cheyenne Mountain and General Hammond's voice came through the intercom with the particular controlled calm of a man who had seen enough strange things to be alarmed without being surprised. "Stand down, do not fire. I want containment teams on level 19 now." Leonardo straightened slowly, hands open, katanas sheathed. Behind him he could feel Raphael vibrating with the effort of not fighting back, could hear Mikey breathing fast through his teeth, could sense Donatello cataloging everything in the room with the focused intensity he got around technology he didn't understand yet. "We're not a threat," Leonardo said clearly. The soldier nearest him, dark-haired, body armor, the look of a man who'd seen things that would make the turtle's entire career in New York look manageable, didn't lower his weapon. "You're going to have to work pretty hard to sell that, pal." That was Colonel Jack O'Neill, though Leonardo didn't know his name yet. Jack. A blonde woman in uniform at the control room window above, studying them with open scientific fascination rather than fear. "Their biology is remarkable. Whatever they are, they came through a clean wormhole." "Yeah, Carter, I can see they're remarkable. 4 of them. Green. Wearing what appears to be athletic equipment." O'Neill lowered his P90 approximately 2 degrees, which was not really lowering it. "Anybody want to explain how you dialed in from an address that isn't in our database?" Donatello raised one hand carefully. "That might have been me. Technically. Though I want to emphasize I was not trying to activate whatever that device was." Noted. O'Neill looked at Hammond's window. "Sir, I'm going to go ahead and recommend the big containment room." Over the next 4 hours, the turtles were scanned, photographed, blood-tested by a very calm Dr. Fraser who treated their mutation with the same professional thoroughness she applied to everything, and interviewed separately by personnel who were clearly trying to determine whether they were gold agents, alien life forms, or something the NID needed to be called about immediately. Leonardo gave straightforward answers. Raphael gave terse ones. Michelangelo asked if there was pizza. Donatello asked 17 questions about the gate for every one he was asked about himself. General Hammond reviewed the footage from the gate room, the medical reports, and a very unusual debrief summary, and made the decision that the SGC had been making since 1997. When something impossible walked through the gate, you figured out whether it could help you before you figured out what to do with it. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Indeed. General George Hammond had authorized the containment of a Norse god, negotiated with sentient energy beings, and once signed paperwork classifying a man who had downloaded an entire alien civilization's knowledge into his brain as temporarily cognitively enhanced. He considered himself difficult to rattle. He looked at the footage from the gate room again, for large, green, reptilian humanoids moving through his facility with the disciplined calm of trained operators, and decided this qualified as unusual even by SGC standards. He met them in the main briefing room on level 27 with SG-1 present, because SG-1 was what you brought to situations that didn't fit existing categories. Leonardo sat at the head of the table's guest side with his brothers flanking him, which Hammond recognized immediately as deliberate. The one in blue had taken the leadership position without being asked, which meant either instinct or training, and the way he carried himself suggested both. The red one, Raphael, had his arms crossed and was looking at the walls like he was mapping exits. Old habit in someone who'd spent a long time operating in hostile environments. The orange one was eating a power bar someone on the medical staff had apparently given him, and showing no signs of stopping. The purple one had a tablet in front of him that he hadn't been given, which meant he'd acquired it somehow in the last 40 minutes. Hammond noted all of this. He hadn't gotten to 2 stars by missing things. "Gentlemen," he said, settling into his chair. "I'm General Hammond. This is Colonel O'Neill, Major Carter, Dr. Jackson, and Tilk." He paused. "I'm not going to pretend this situation is normal. But in my experience, the best way through abnormal situations is direct conversation. So, start from the beginning." Leonardo did. He was concise and accurate. Hammond appreciated both, covering their origin, their training, their existence hidden beneath New York, and the circumstances that had brought them through the gate. He left nothing significant out. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "Mutant turtles," O'Neill said. "Trained in ninjutsu. Living in the sewers." "That is correct," Leonardo said. O'Neill looked at Tilk. Tilk inclined his head in the particular way that meant he was reserving judgment. "The gate address you dialed from," Carter said, leaning forward, her attention fixed on Donatello with the focused energy she reserved for things that genuinely puzzled her. "That address doesn't exist in our system. Where did that gate come from?" "I have no idea," Donatello said honestly. "But I've been thinking about it for the last 4 hours and I have some theories about the power configuration, if you want to." "I really do," Carter said. "Maybe let's table the science fair," O'Neill said. "General, with respect, I want to talk about the part where we have 4 unknown individuals inside this facility who arrived through an unregistered gate address that we cannot currently verify or close." "The gate address cycled out," Carter said. "Whatever powered it in New York exhausted its energy source. It won't reactivate without an external power input we don't know how to replicate. So they can't go home," Daniel said. He was looking at Leonardo with the particular expression he got when he recognized something in another person's situation. The weight of being somewhere you hadn't chosen, among people who hadn't chosen you either. "Not right now." Leonardo absorbed this without visible reaction, though Hammond watched something tighten briefly around his eyes. "Then we work the problem," he said. "Your people," Hammond said. "Is anyone expecting you? Anyone who'll come looking?" "Master Splinter," Michelangelo said, suddenly serious. The power bar wrapper went still in his hands. "He'll know something went wrong." "Our sensei," Leonardo clarified. "He'll know we're missing within hours. He has no way to follow." Hammond nodded slowly. He looked at the faces around the table, his people reading the turtles reading his people, and made the assessment he'd been building towards since the gate room footage. They weren't gold. The symbiote would have surfaced under the medical scans. They weren't NID plants. The NID didn't have the imagination. They were exactly what they appeared to be, 4 trained, disciplined, deeply unusual warriors who were a long way from home and handling it with more composure than most of his own recruits managed on their first off-world mission. That didn't make them trustworthy. It made them worth evaluating. "Here's where we stand," Hammond said. "You're inside the most classified facility on Earth. You've seen things that require the highest security clearance we have. I can't send you home, not yet. And frankly, I can't put you back on the street with what you now know about this program." He folded his hands on the table. "What I can do is offer you a provisional arrangement. You stay here, cooperate fully with our personnel, and we work together on getting you back to New York. In the meantime, you don't leave this facility without authorization." "And if we say no?" Raphael asked. It wasn't hostile, just precise. "Then you stay in containment, while we work the problem anyway, and everybody's time gets wasted." Hammond met his eyes. "I'd rather not do that." Raphael looked at Leonardo. Something passed between them that Hammond recognized as the compressed communication of people who'd operated together long enough to hold full conversations without words. "We cooperate," Leonardo said. O'Neill leaned back in his chair. "Great. So." He looked at the 4 of them with the expression of a man mentally rewriting every operational assumption he'd started the day with. "Ninja Turtles. In my mountain. To be fair," Michelangelo offered, "it's a very nice mountain." Tilk turned to look at him with an expression of genuine evaluation. "You possess combat training," he said. It wasn't a question. "Since we were kids," Michelangelo said. "Indeed," Tilk said, and something in his tone suggested that whatever assessment he'd been running had just reached a preliminary conclusion. Hammond dismissed the meeting. As SG-1 filed out with their new temporary guests, he picked up the phone to call the Pentagon and begin composing, in his head, the single most difficult incident report of his career. The SGC gymnasium on level 22 was not designed for what happened in it the following morning, but it was the closest thing Cheyenne Mountain had to a space large enough for what Tilk had in mind. He had requested the evaluation personally. Hammond had approved it with the quiet confidence of a man who understood that Tilk's assessments of combat capability were more reliable than any written test the Pentagon could devise. O'Neill had invited himself to watch, which meant Carter and Daniel had come too, and somehow by 0700 there were 14 SGC personnel ranged along the gymnasium walls pretending they were there for other reasons. The arrangement was straightforward. Tilk would spar with each turtle individually. Non-lethal. Controlled. He wanted to understand what they could do before he decided what he thought of them. Leonardo went first. What followed was 3 minutes and 40 seconds that would be discussed in the SGC commissary for the remainder of the year. Tilk fought with the measured power of a man who had served as first prime of Apophis for decades. Precise, devastating, drawing on a body enhanced by decades of symbiote healing and a fighting education that predated most Earth civilizations. He was not accustomed to opponents who could match his speed. Leonardo matched his speed. More than that, he flowed around Tilk's offense with a quality of movement that was less like combat, and more like water finding the path of least resistance. Deflecting, redirecting, never meeting force with force when angles existed. When Tilk finally pressed him to the wall with a combination that had ended most engagements in his career, Leonardo wasn't at the wall anymore. He was behind Tilk, the practiced blade of a borrowed bow's staff resting lightly against the Jaffa's neck. The gymnasium was very quiet. Tilk straightened slowly. He turned. He looked at Leonardo for a long moment with the particular expression he reserved for things that had genuinely earned his respect. "Indeed," he said. O'Neill wrote something in the small notebook he carried and pretended he wasn't carrying. Raphael went second and the approach was entirely different, aggressive, relentless. A fighting style built on pressure and controlled ferocity that pushed Tilk backward twice in the first 90 seconds. There was anger threaded through Raphael's technique the way good steel had carbon in it, not a flaw, a component that made it harder. Tilk adapted, slowed him with a clinch that should have neutralized the aggression, and found that Raphael fought out of holds with a stubbornness that was almost philosophical. They ended in a draw that both of them seemed to find satisfying in the way that certain kinds of physical conversation could be satisfying. Donatello went third. His bow staff work was technically exceptional. Range, angles, combination patterns that kept Tilk at a distance, and exploited reach in ways that compensated honestly for the size and strength differential. He was the most methodical of them. When Tilk finally got inside his guard, Donatello immediately transitioned to close-quarters work that suggested he trained for exactly that contingency. Carter leaned toward O'Neill. "He's running tactical adjustments in real time." "I can see that, Carter. It's impressive." "I know it's impressive. I'm standing right here." Michelangelo went last, and this was where the gymnasium got complicated. Nobody watching had taken Michelangelo entirely seriously. He had spent the previous 24 hours asking questions about the commissary menu, expressing enthusiasm about the size of the elevator, and doing what appeared to be a comedy routine for the gate technicians. He bounced on his heels before the spar began and grinned at Tilk in a way that suggested he hadn't fully grasped the situation. Then the spar started, and it became rapidly apparent that Michelangelo's entire presentation was a feint so deeply habitual it had become genuine personality. And that underneath it was something that moved like improvised music, unpredictable in ways that trained pattern recognition simply couldn't track. He didn't fight like his brothers. He fought like someone who had turned chaos into a discipline, using misdirection and timing and an almost offensive level of creativity that meant Tilk was consistently responding to the last thing Michelangelo had done rather than anticipating the next. When the spar ended, another draw, technically, though several observers felt Michelangelo had edged it, Tilk stood still for a moment, and then did something nobody in the room had seen him do unprompted in a professional context. He smiled. "You have trained well," he said. "All of you. Our sensei would be honored," Leonardo said. "You're exceptional." "I was first prime of Apophis for many years," Tilk said, without particular pride. "I have fought the best warriors on many worlds." He paused. "You would not have been easy to defeat." O'Neill capped his pen. "Okay," he said, to the room and to himself simultaneously. "So that's a thing." He looked at Leonardo. "Your hand-to-hand is better than anyone on my team, which I'm going to pretend doesn't sting. Your weapons are close quarters only, which is a problem in a universe where the standard enemy weapon is a staff that fires plasma bolts. And you have no experience with off-world environments, alien technology, or the specific brand of awful that the gold bring to any situation. Brief us, Leonardo said simply. O'Neill studied him. That easy? We're in an unknown environment with threats we don't understand, no way home, and people who have more information than we do. Yes, Colonel. Brief us. That's how you start. Daniel looked at O'Neill with an expression that clearly communicated he found this turtle more reasonable than O'Neill on most mornings. Daniel, O'Neill said. Already pulling the files, Daniel said. Carter was already at the wall display. I'll start with the gate network. Then we can cover the gold political structure, current system lord activity. And snacks? Michelangelo asked. Someone get him a power bar, O'Neill said. P3X774 came up in the mission rotation 48 hours later, which O'Neill privately considered either good timing or the universe's sense of humor. MLP telemetry showed a temperate world forested, with ruins consistent with gold architectural influence, and what appeared to be a functioning village settlement 2 kilometers from the gate. Standard first contact parameters. The kind of mission SG-1 ran in their sleep. He requested the turtles be attached to the team. Hammond had taken 20 seconds to decide, which for Hammond was practically impulsive. The turtles had spent 2 days absorbing everything Daniel and Carter could teach them about gate travel, gold society, Jaffa military structure, and the basic political map of a galaxy that had been run by parasitic false gods for 10,000 years. Leonardo had asked precise, tactical questions throughout. Donatello had filled an entire notebook and then requisitioned another one. Raphael had said very little and retained everything. O'Neill recognized the type. Michelangelo had seemed only partially attentive, and then during the final review had answered every question Carter posed with complete accuracy, which O'Neill filed under things that didn't surprise him anymore. The gate room felt different with 6 people on the ramp. Chevron 1 encoded. The technician's voice came over the intercom, and O'Neill watched the turtles' faces as the sequence ran. The grinding mechanical certainty of each lock, the building subsonic vibration, the way the kawoosh punched outward and then settled into the event horizon's impossible shimmer. Leonardo was still, reading it. Raphael's jaw tightened once. Donatello was already reaching for his scanner before O'Neill told him to put it away until they were through. Michelangelo said, "Whoa," very quietly, and it was the most genuine thing O'Neill had heard anyone say in front of a wormhole in years. "Stay close, watch our spacing, do exactly what I tell you when I tell you," O'Neill said. "Questions? What does it feel like?" Michelangelo asked. "Wrong," O'Neill said and stepped through. P3X774 on the other side was cold and green and smelled like pine resin and wood smoke. The gate standing in a clearing ringed by trees with silver bark that caught the light of a slightly too orange sun. The turtles came through in sequence, and each of them hit the alien air and stopped for a half-second with the same expression, the involuntary pause of a brain registering that the sky was wrong, the light was wrong, the gravity was fractionally different, and none of it was New York or Cheyenne Mountain or anywhere on Earth. Leonardo recovered first. He scanned the tree line with his hand on his katana and said nothing, which O'Neill respected. "Different star," Donatello said, looking up. "We're actually on another planet." "Yep," Carter said. "That's—" Donatello stopped. Started again. "That's extraordinary. First 20 times," O'Neill said. "After that it's just Tuesday. Move out." The village was 2 kilometers through forest that the turtles moved through with a silence that made O'Neill's own team sound like they were wearing boots full of gravel. Stealth was apparently not something that required coaching. The settlement itself was a cluster of stone and timber buildings arranged around a central well, maybe 200 inhabitants by O'Neill's estimate, with the particular quality of watchful exhaustion that he'd learned to recognize on worlds that lived under gold occupation. people who had survived by keeping their heads down and their expectations low. The village elder, a heavy-set woman named Yara with gray-streaked hair and steady eyes, received them in front of the largest building. She looked at SG-1 with the careful assessment of someone practiced at reading strangers quickly. Then her eyes moved to the turtles and stayed there. "These are allies," Daniel said in gold, which served as the galaxy's closest thing to a common language on most seeded worlds. "Warriors from our world. They mean no harm." Yara looked at Leonardo specifically. "They are unlike any servants of the gods I have seen." "They're not servants of the gods," Leonardo said in English, which Daniel translated. "Nobody should be." Something shifted in Yara's expression. Not quite hope. Hope was dangerous on worlds like this, O'Neill had learned. More like the careful testing of a door you weren't sure would hold weight. Over the next hour Daniel worked the cultural exchange while Carter ran her instruments, and O'Neill kept his eyes on the perimeter. The turtles distributed themselves instinctively. Leonardo near Daniel, Raphael on the outer edge of the village watching the approach paths, Michelangelo somewhere in the middle of a conversation with three children who had apparently decided his shell was the most interesting thing on the planet. Donatello crouched near the village's Naquata lamp fixtures with his scanner at a level of focus that suggested he'd forgotten he was on an alien world entirely. It was Raphael who heard it first. He was at O'Neill's shoulder before the sound fully registered, a distant rhythmic percussion, atmospheric, carrying through the tree line from the northwest. O'Neill knew what it was before Raphael spoke. "Something's coming. Big. Moving in formation." "Jaffa," Tilk said, already scanning. "Hatak patrol. 8, perhaps 10 warriors." The village changed in an instant. Yara's face closed like a shutter. People moved toward buildings with the practiced speed of a population that had drilled this particular evacuation without being taught. Children disappeared. "Options," Leonardo said quietly, appearing at O'Neill's left. "We don't engage unless they engage us," O'Neill said. "We observe, we don't escalate." "And if they take someone?" O'Neill looked at him. It was the right question and the hard question, and there was no clean answer for it. "Then it gets complicated." Leonardo nodded once. His hand rested on his katana. Around them the village went silent, and through the silver trees the sound of staff weapons and heavy Jaffa boots grew steadily closer. The Jaffa came through the tree line in a column of 10, staff weapons carried at a diagonal that meant ready but not yet hostile, the body language of occupation rather than assault. Their armor caught the orange sunlight in dull gold fragments. The lead warrior was broader than the others, with the particular bearing of a Jaffa who had held rank long enough to mistake authority for divinity. O'Neill recognized the Serpent Guard helmets immediately. Apophis's men. "Nobody moves," he said quietly, in the tone that didn't require volume to carry weight. The Jaffa patrol entered the village square and stopped. The lead warrior, a Jaffa colonel by the insignia on his armor, O'Neill estimated, surveyed the empty settlement with the flat suspicion of someone who knew what a village looked like when it was hiding. His eyes moved across SG-1 with practiced threat assessment, paused on Tilk with the particular hatred reserved for traitors, and then found the turtles. He stopped. The silence stretched for 3 full seconds. "Kree!" The lead Jaffa staff weapon came up, and the column behind him followed the motion in a single practiced wave, 10 staff weapons cycling to active, the distinctive high-pitched charging whine filling the square. "Easy," O'Neill said, hands visible. "We're just travelers." Peaceful. The lead Jaffa wasn't looking at O'Neill. He was still looking at the turtles, and in his expression O'Neill read something that in a human face he would have called theological disturbance. The look of a man whose framework for the universe had just developed a crack. "What manner of creatures serve the Tauri?" he demanded. "Independent contractors," Michelangelo offered. "Mikey," Raphael said. Leonardo had gone completely still in the way O'Neill was learning meant maximum readiness rather than passivity. He stood with his hands open and visible, which required visible effort, and said nothing. Waiting. Measuring. These beings, the lead Jaffa said, turning to the warrior beside him and speaking in lower gold that Daniel translated in a murmur at O'Neill's ear, are unknown to the archives. My Lord Apophis will want them brought for examination. That's a no from us, O'Neill said. The staff weapons didn't waver. The lead Jaffa looked at O'Neill with the patient contempt of a man holding 10 charged weapons and facing 6 targets. You are not in a position to refuse, Tauri. What happened next happened in approximately 4 seconds and would require 2 separate after-action reports to adequately document. Leonardo moved. Not toward the Jaffa. Toward the space between them, the angle that a trained tactical eye could see and an untrained one couldn't, the geometry of the situation that put him at the edge of the lead Jaffa's peripheral vision before the man had fully registered he was in motion. The lead Jaffa turned and found a katana blade resting against his staff weapon's power cell coupling, precisely placed, not threatening flesh, threatening hardware. Nobody has to get hurt, Leonardo said quietly. Tell your men to stand down. The lead Jaffa's eyes went to the blade. His expression cycled through surprise, fury, and then something more calculating. In the same moment Raphael had drifted left and Michelangelo right in movements that had the quality of something rehearsed, though O'Neill had never seen them drill it. The flanking pattern was instinct, years of street-level combat compressed into reflex. The Jaffa column found itself geometrically complicated in a way that staff weapons in close quarters made difficult to resolve cleanly. Tilk had moved to cover O'Neill's right. Carter had her P90 up. Daniel had his hand on his sidearm. Jaffa. Tilk's voice carried the specific authority of a man who had commanded these warriors' predecessors. You will lower your weapons. These beings are under the protection of the Tauri and are not for your lord's examination. Lower your weapons and return to your patrol. The column held. The lead Jaffa held. The square held its breath. It was Yara who broke it. She emerged from the doorway behind the Jaffa column, alone, which was either bravery or desperation, O'Neill couldn't tell, and spoke in a flat, exhausted voice. Please! Not here. Not today! We have nothing left to give. The lead Jaffa turned to look at her. Something moved in his face that was almost human. He looked back at Leonardo's blade against his staff weapon. He looked at Tilk. He made the calculation that professional soldiers made when the geometry of a situation stopped being favorable. Lower weapons, he said. The column stood down. The lead Jaffa looked at Leonardo as the katana came back. My Lord Apophis will hear of this day, he said, with the quiet certainty of a man stating fact rather than making threat. These creatures will be known to him. Tell him we said hello, O'Neill said. The patrol withdrew into the tree line. O'Neill watched until the sound of their boots faded to nothing, then let out a breath through his teeth and turned to Leonardo. I told you we don't engage unless they engage us. They were about to take someone, Leonardo said. You could see it in the way the column was spacing toward the buildings. O'Neill had seen it. He'd been weighing it when Leonardo moved. Next time, you check with me first. If there's time, Leonardo said. It wasn't defiance. It was just precise, and O'Neill found he couldn't argue with precision. He looked at Tilk instead. Tilk's expression communicated that the situation had been resolved and the philosophical debate could wait. But the lead Jaffa's final words sat in O'Neill's chest like a stone settling to the bottom of cold water. Apophis would hear. In O'Neill's experience, when Apophis heard about something unusual on one of his worlds, he didn't send more patrols. He sent a mothership. They were back through the gate within the hour. The debrief on level 28 was the kind that Hammond ran with his hands flat on the table and his voice at its most controlled, which the people who knew him understood as a register reserved for situations that were already complicated and getting more so. O'Neill gave the report straight, including Leonardo's unilateral decision to engage, including the Jaffa patrol leader's final words. Hammond listened without interrupting, which was its own form of commentary. Your assessment, Hammond said when O'Neill finished. Does Apophis move on this? He moves unless, O'Neill said. 4 unknown creatures on one of his occupied worlds, associated with SG-1, and till present? He spread his hands. I'd bet my pension on a HOTAC response within 72 hours. The Jaffa's description of them will be incomplete, Tilk added. He had no framework for what he observed. That uncertainty will interest Apophis more than a known threat. He will want answers. Hammond looked at the turtles, who were seated along the far wall with the attentiveness of people who understood they were being discussed as much as consulted. Leonardo met Hammond's eyes directly. Raphael was watching O'Neill. Donatello had his notebook open. Michelangelo, for once, was entirely still. The gold selection criteria for hosts. Hammond said carefully. Major Carter. Carter pulled up the relevant data with the professional neutrality she applied to information that was personally unpleasant. Apophis prioritizes physical superiority, genetic resilience, and what the Takare describe as neurological compatibility with the symbiote. The host needs to be strong enough to survive the blending and provide the gold with enhanced physical capability. She paused. The turtle's mutation gives them strength, healing rate, and physical durability that would be extremely attractive to a system lord looking for a superior host. The room absorbed this. He wants to wear one of us, Raphael said flatly. That's essentially accurate, Daniel said. Not going to happen, Leonardo said. No, Hammond agreed. It's not. He straightened. Which is why I've requested an urgent communication with the Takare High Council. Jacob Carter is currently embedded on a Goa'uld-controlled world but can be reached through the Council relay. He looked at Carter. Your father may have intelligence on Apophis's current patrol patterns and fleet positions that changes our options. Carter nodded. The particular quality of her nod when her father was mentioned was something O'Neill had long since learned not to comment on. The Takare communication came through 6 hours later on the long-range transmitter, Jacob Carter's voice carrying the slight harmonic undertone of Selmac's presence in every sentence. George, I'll skip the part where I pretend I'm not going to tell you everything I know. Jacob's voice was warm and direct in the way of men who'd stopped having time for preamble. We've had 3 separate intelligence reports in the last 36 hours about unusual activity on P3X774. Apophis dispatched a reconnaissance HOTAC 4 hours ago. He's not sending soldiers, he's sending scientists. Gold scientists, O'Neill said from across the room. His chief symbiogenetics specialist specifically, Jacob said. A Goa'uld named Herak who spent 2 centuries developing host selection methodology for Apophis before the current Herak became his first prime. Different individual. This one has a HOTAC and a mandate to acquire whatever the patrol encountered and bring it back breathing. The word breathing landed in the room with specific weight. How long? Hammond asked. At current HOTAC speed from their last reported position? 30 hours to P3X774. Maybe 35. Jacob paused. George, I need to say something directly. Selmac concurs. If Apophis acquires even one of these individuals as a host, the resulting gold would be unlike anything in the current system lord hierarchy. The physical capability alone. I understand, Jacob. There's an option, Jacob said. The Takare have been tracking a gold supply line that runs through a system 2 hops from P3X774. If SGC can create a situation that pulls Apophis's attention toward that system, we can feed him false intelligence suggesting the Tauri are attempting to raid his Naquata reserves there. He redirects Herak's HOTAC, the immediate threat to P3X774 dissolves, and the village gets breathing room. A diversion, Carter said. A diversion that requires someone to be visibly present in that system to make the intelligence credible, Jacob said. Takare assets can't do it without burning covers we've spent years building. It would need to be SGC. O'Neill looked at Hammond. Hammond looked at O'Neill. Send us the coordinates, O'Neill said. After the communication closed, the briefing room rearranged itself into the specific configuration of people planning something that had a real chance of going wrong. Carter pulled star maps. Daniel cross-referenced Goa'uld patrol schedules from the database. Teal'c provided fleet movement patterns from memory with the fluency of a man who had spent decades inside the system they were trying to manipulate. Leonardo moved to the star map and studied it with the focused attention he'd brought to every piece of tactical information since their arrival. O'Neill watched him trace the route geometry, P3X774, the diversion system, the Hatak's probable intercept window, with the quiet competence of someone reading terrain before a mission. The diversion system, Leonardo said. We need to get there, be detected, and extract before the Hatak arrives. In and out fast, O'Neill confirmed. What's on the ground there? Abandoned Goa'uld outpost, Carter said. Minimal automated defenses. No current garrison. Leonardo nodded slowly. The automated defenses, can they be bypassed? Given enough time, Donatello said, already looking at Carter's technical readouts from across the table. We won't have enough time, O'Neill said. That's the point. Leonardo looked at him. Then we go in quiet enough that the defenses don't trigger until we're ready for them to. He paused. That's what we do, Colonel. We go in where we're not supposed to be, and we leave before anyone can stop us. O'Neill considered this. He looked at Teal'c. Teal'c's expression said he found the assessment sound. All right, O'Neill said. Let's talk about how 4 turtles infiltrate a Goa'uld outpost. The planet designated P2X338 on the SGC database had no name that anyone living used anymore, because nobody living had been there in approximately 3 centuries. The Goa'uld outpost that Apophis had abandoned when his attention moved to more strategically valuable systems was a single-structure facility built into a cliff face overlooking a gray stone valley, squat, functional, ugly in the specific way that Goa'uld architecture was ugly when it wasn't performing divinity. The MALP they sent through 40 minutes before insertion showed no heat signatures, automated sentry drones in a standard patrol pattern around the perimeter, and an Aquata power conduit running along the cliff base that was still live. The drones run on a 20-second rotation cycle, Carter said, pointing at the MALP footage on the briefing room screen. There's a 4-second window on the north approach between the second and third drones' sweep pattern. 4 seconds, Raphael said. 6 people, Carter confirmed. And if even one person misses the window? Daniel asked. The drones alert the facility's automated staff weapon emplacements, and we spend the rest of the insertion under fire. Carter's delivery was perfectly neutral. So we don't miss the window. The plan was architecturally simple in the way that the best plans were, simple enough to explain in 4 sentences, complicated enough in execution that it required everyone doing their specific part precisely. SG-1 would gate to P2X338, breach the facility under cover of the drone window, access the outpost's long-range communication array, and broadcast a signal on Goa'uld military frequencies suggesting an unauthorized Tauri operation targeting Apophis's Naquata supply infrastructure. Visible enough to redirect Herak's Hatak. Brief enough to get out before the automated defenses escalated to full lockdown. The turtles' role was the breach. Getting 6 people through a 4-second window in complete silence across 30 meters of open ground required a quality of movement that O'Neill was honest enough with himself to acknowledge his team alone couldn't guarantee. The turtles could. They gated in at 0200 local time on a moonless night, which on P2X338 meant a darkness so complete that the valley was effectively invisible beyond arm's length. The turtles moved through it without apparent difficulty. O'Neill had his night vision but found himself following Leonardo's silhouette more than his own optics, because Leonardo navigated the dark terrain with a certainty that suggested his other senses were carrying the load his eyes couldn't. 30 meters from the perimeter. 20. The drone patrol swept the north approach in its standard arc, second drone passing, rotation continuing, the 4-second gap opening like a held breath. Leonardo went first. Then Michelangelo. Then Carter, who moved faster than O'Neill had ever seen her move on an approach. Raphael with Daniel between his shoulder blades, pushing pace without touching. Teal'c. O'Neill last through the gap with approximately 1 second to spare, pressing flat against the cliff face as the third drone completed its arc over the space they just crossed. 6 people. 0 alerts. Raphael exhaled very quietly. In the dark, O'Neill could see the shape of him looking back at the perimeter with an expression that in better light might have been satisfaction. The facility's service entrance was in a quad-alloy door with a crystal interface lock that Donatello had studied from MALP footage for 20 minutes before departure, and now crouched in front of with Carter beside him, both of them working the bypass in a silence broken only by the faint sound of crystal panels being carefully manipulated. They had developed, in the past 48 hours, the specific collaborative rhythm of 2 technical minds that had found complementary frequencies. Carter providing gate network knowledge and Gold systems architecture, Donatello providing what he described as a general intuition for how power systems want to behave, that Carter had initially received skeptically and was now treating with complete professional respect. The door opened in 90 seconds. Inside, the outpost smelled of 3 centuries of closed air and the quada residue, metallic, faintly charged, the particular atmosphere of gold interiors that O'Neill had long since associated with situations going sideways. Emergency lighting cast everything in dim amber. The communication array was 1 level up, accessible via a ring transporter or a maintenance ladder that ran along the facility's interior wall. Ring transporter activates the facility's internal sensors, Carter said quietly. Ladder, Leonardo said. They took the ladder. The upper level was a single large room dominated by the communication array, a column of gold crystal technology interfaced with a long-range transmission dish that had been broadcasting automated status signals for 300 years out of pure mechanical fidelity to its last standing orders. Carter was at the interface in 30 seconds, Donatello behind her reading the crystal configuration while she worked. O'Neill posted at the room's single entrance. Tilk took the opposite wall. The turtles arranged themselves at the room's sight lines with the same instinctive geometry they'd used in the village square. Coverage without overlap, each angle accounted for. 2 minutes, Carter said. They had 90 seconds before the automated systems ran a standard integrity check that would register the door bypass. O'Neill didn't mention this because Carter already knew, and mentioning it wouldn't make her faster. Leonardo appeared at O'Neill's shoulder. The facility's power reading changed when we came through the door, he said quietly. Something in the lower level registered our entry. O'Neill looked at him. You can feel that? Donnie can. He told me before we came up the ladder. O'Neill turned to Carter. Carter. I know, she said, fingers moving faster across the crystal interface. 90 seconds. Below them, from the lower level, came the sound that O'Neill's experienced nervous system identified before his conscious mind did, the cycling whine of automated staff weapon emplacements coming online. Make it 60, O'Neill said. Carter's hands didn't stop moving. The communication array interface responded to her touch with the particular resistance of gold technology that hadn't been accessed by a living operator in centuries. Crystals stiff in their housings. Power pathways requiring manual coaxing through sequences that the system's automated maintenance hadn't been designed to anticipate. She worked through it with the focused calm that O'Neill had stopped finding remarkable years ago because remarkable didn't cover it anymore. Below them, the staff weapon emplacements cycled through their activation sequence with mechanical patience. 45 seconds, she said. Tilk, O'Neill said. Tilk was already moving toward the maintenance ladder, staff weapon, borrowed from the SGC's confiscated inventory, at his shoulder. Raphael fell in behind him without being asked, and O'Neill watched the pairing happen with the pragmatic satisfaction of a commander seeing force distribution solve itself. Tilk knew gold automated systems. Raphael moved through confined spaces like he'd been built for them. Don't engage unless they reach the ladder, O'Neill said. They went down. Leonardo stayed at the room entrance, katanas drawn, which O'Neill had learned in 4 days meant the situation had passed his internal threshold for staff weapon fire being a realistic possibility. Michelangelo took the room's secondary access point, A ventilation corridor that the facility schematics hadn't flagged as passable but that Michelangelo had looked at on the MALP footage and apparently decided was passable, because he was in it, and moving before O'Neill fully processed the decision. Donatello stayed beside Carter, reading crystal configurations over her shoulder, and calling out power pathway options in a low voice that was keeping her 30 seconds ahead of where she'd be alone. "Signal packet is assembled," Carter said. "I need 12 more seconds to encode the gold military frequency authentication." From below came the distinctive discharge sound of a staff weapon, not fired at a person, O'Neill's ear told him, but fired at hardware. The activation cycle on the emplacements stuttered and dropped in pitch. Tilk's voice came up the ladder shaft. "Emplacement 1 is disabled. 2 more remain active." 10 seconds, Carter said. The second emplacement fired. The facility shuddered. Dust came down from the upper-level ceiling in a thin curtain and the amber emergency lighting flickered. In the ventilation corridor, O'Neill could hear Michelangelo moving fast towards something, the sound of his nunchaku extending, then a short impact sequence, and the third emplacement's cycle cutting out mid-charge. Silence from the automated defenses. "Signal transmitted," Carter said. She pulled her hands back from the interface, and the communication array went dark. "Transmission complete. Frequency authentication burned. The false intelligence now propagating through gold military channels toward Herax Hatak at the speed of subspace communication. Jacob's diversion, fully seated." O'Neill let out a breath. "Good work. We move." They came back together at the facility's service entrance. Tilk and Raphael up from the lower level, Michelangelo dropping from the ventilation corridor exit with the casual economy of someone who considered a 3-meter drop an unremarkable landing, Carter and Donatello through the door with the equipment packed and the bypass seal replaced as cleanly as they could manage. 4 minutes and change from entry to exit. O'Neill had run operations with twice the personnel that had taken 3 times as long. The return to the gate was fast and quiet. The drones were mid-rotation when they reached the perimeter, and Leonardo read the timing without consulting Carter's numbers, calling the window by feel and being right by 2 seconds. They went through the gap in the same order as the approach, and were through the gate inside 8 minutes from signal transmission. The gate room on the other side felt, as it always did after a field operation, simultaneously too bright and too still. Hammond was waiting at the bottom of the ramp. His expression asked the question before he did. "Signals away," O'Neill said. "Clean exit. No casualties." Hammond nodded. "Jacob confirms Herax Hatak has already adjusted course. The diversion is holding." He paused. "P3X774 is clear for now. The TOC-RA are monitoring Apophis' fleet response." "For now," O'Neill said. "For now," Hammond agreed. The debrief ran for 90 minutes. O'Neill gave the operational sequence with the efficiency of long practice. Carter provided the technical detail. Tilk confirmed the emplacement engagement parameters. When Hammond asked the turtles for their individual assessments, each of them gave one, concise, accurate, professionally structured, and O'Neill noticed Hammond noting this without commenting on it, filing it in the same mental register where O'Neill had been filing things about these 4 since the gymnasium. Afterward, in the corridor outside the briefing room, Leonardo fell into step beside O'Neill with the timing of someone who'd been waiting for the natural moment rather than manufacturing one. "Apophis knows about us now," Leonardo said. "The diversion buys time. It doesn't change what his patrol reported." "No," O'Neill said. "It doesn't. So he'll come back to it. That's what he does." O'Neill stopped walking. He looked at Leonardo with the directness he used when he was done managing a conversation and wanted to have it instead. "You handled tonight well. All of you. You sound surprised." "I'm not surprised. I'm confirmed." O'Neill started walking again. "There's a difference." Leonardo was quiet for a moment. "What happens when Apophis stops redirecting and comes directly?" It was the right question. The one O'Neill had been turning over since Jacob's first call. The diversion had bought P3X774 breathing room and pulled Herax Hatak off the intercept course, but Apophis was not a system lord who forgot things. He had the patrol report. He had whatever subspace chatter Herax sensors had picked up from P2X338. He had the particular obsessive focus that had kept him alive and powerful through a decade of SG-1 systematically dismantling everything he'd built. He would come back to it. The only question was when and with how much. Then we stop redirecting, O'Neill said, and we have a different conversation. Down the corridor behind them, from the direction of the commissary, came Michelangelo's voice asking someone what time breakfast started and whether the SGC had ever considered keeping pizza on the overnight menu. O'Neill almost smiled. The unscheduled off-world activation alarm hit Cheyenne Mountain at 0340 on a Tuesday with the particular urgency that distinguished incoming wormholes from routine gate operations. 3 short tones, the gate room lights shifting to red, the iris slamming shut with the heavy clang of titanium doing its only job. O'Neill was in the corridor outside his quarters with his boots half-laced before the second tone finished. By the time he reached the control room, the situation was already shaped. It's a gold transmission frequency, the gate technician said, fingers moving across his console. Encoded. Military channel. It's addressed to us specifically. Put it through, Hammond said from directly behind O'Neill. The voice that came through the speakers was one that O'Neill's nervous system responded to before his conscious mind caught up. Deep, resonant, carrying the harmonic double tone of a gold symbiote speaking through a human host with the particular theatrical cadence of a being who had spent millennia being worshipped. Apophis. Tauri. The word landed like a blade placed on a table. You have something that belongs to the gods. 4 creatures of unknown origin, encountered on my world, witnessed by my warriors. You believed a crude deception would satisfy my curiosity. A pause calibrated for effect. It did not. I have dispatched a fleet of 3 Hatak vessels to the coordinates of the world you call P3X774. The inhabitants there will answer for harboring those who defy the gods, unless the creatures are delivered to me within 6 hours. This is not a negotiation. The transmission ended. The control room held its collective breath for 2 seconds. 3 Hatak, Carter said from the console beside the technician. Against P3X774's 0 orbital defenses. Yara, Daniel said quietly. 200 people. Stone buildings and a well. O'Neill turned. The turtles were in the control room doorway, all 4 of them, which meant they'd been moving before the alarm finished the same way he had. Leonardo's face was reading the room with the speed of someone assembling a tactical picture from fragments. He got there fast. He'll destroy the village, Leonardo said. It wasn't a question. If we don't give him what he wants, yes, Hammond said. And if we do give him what he wants. You don't give him what he wants, Raphael said. The flatness in his voice left no structural room for alternative interpretations. Nobody's suggesting that, O'Neill said. Then what are you suggesting? Leonardo asked. O'Neill looked at Hammond. Hammond looked at O'Neill. Between them passed the compressed communication of 2 men who had been in this specific geometry before. Impossible timeline, civilian lives on the scale, options that were all bad except one that was merely terrible. We go to P3X774, O'Neill said. We get those people off the planet before the Hatak arrive. 200 people through a single gate in under 6 hours. Carter said. It's possible. Barely. An Apophis's fleet? Tilk asked. We deal with that problem when it's in front of us instead of in front of P3X774, O'Neill said. The gate was dialing before Hammond finished authorizing the mission. P3X774 on the other side was pre-dawn dark and cold, the silverbark trees catching starlight at the forest edge, the village silent. It didn't stay silent long. Daniel moved through the settlement at a pace O'Neill had rarely seen from him, gold flowing fast and clear, waking people with the specific blend of urgency and calm that was harder to maintain than either quality alone. Yara came out of her building with her hair loose and her eyes immediately understanding, which told O'Neill she'd lived through enough gold threats to recognize the shape of one arriving in the night. "How long?" she asked Daniel. "Less than 6 hours. We need everyone through the gate." She didn't argue. She organized. The turtles moved through the evacuation with a competence that O'Neill watched in his peripheral vision while managing his own sectors, Leonardo coordinating the gate-side flow with Carter, keeping the movement orderly and the pace maximum without triggering the panic that would cost time. Raphael and Tilk on the perimeter, pushing the Trilene watch out to maximum range for early warning. Michelangelo moving through the village interior with an ease around frightened people, especially children, that O'Neill hadn't anticipated and filed immediately as something he should have anticipated. Donatello was at the DHD. "If I modify the gate's dialing frequency using the power conduit variance I mapped at P2X338, he said to Carter during a 30-second overlap at the gate, "I can extend the wormhole window past 38 minutes. Theoretically." "How theoretically?" Carter asked. 60-40 it works. "And if it doesn't?" "The gate closes mid-evacuation." Carter looked at the line of villagers moving toward the event horizon. Counted. Did the math O'Neill could see her doing. "Do it," she said. "But not until we're at the 30-minute mark." 4 hours and 50 minutes into the evacuation, with 43 villagers still on the P3X774 side of the gate, the sky changed. 3 Hatak vessels dropped out of hyperspace in low orbit with the specific visual weight of objects that had no business being that large moving that fast. The thermal bloom of their entry washed the pre-dawn sky orange-white, and the sound arrived 11 seconds later, a deep atmospheric compression that O'Neill felt in his back teeth. "Faster," Leonardo said, not loudly. Somehow everyone heard it. Apophis didn't fire immediately. He never did. Theatrics were load-bearing in his operating philosophy. But O'Neill could see the death gliders launching from the nearest Hatak's flight bays, 40 of them in a pattern that meant ground strafing rather than orbital bombardment. 23 villagers left. "Donatello," Carter said. 31 minutes on the clock, Donatello said, hands already on the DHD's power conduit interface. "I'm doing it now." The gate shuddered. The event horizon flickered once, twice, and held, stretched past its design parameters by a modification that had no business working and was working anyway. 15 villagers. The first death glider screamed over the Trilene. The death gliders came in low, which was a tactical mistake born of arrogance. Staff cannon fire tore through the silverbark trees at the forest edge, throwing bark and light in equal measure, the strafing run aimed at the gate, and the people moving toward it. O'Neill returned fire on instinct, P-90 tracking the lead glider's underbelly as it screamed overhead, knowing it accomplished nothing structurally but needing the motion. Tilk's staff weapon discharged twice in precise intervals. Beside him, Raphael moved in the opposite direction of every other person on the ground, toward the incoming fire rather than away from it, side-drawn, which was not a practical response to aerial attack and was somehow the right one anyway because the lead glider pilot hadn't anticipated a ground target moving into his strafing line and pulled up short. It bought 4 seconds. 10 left, Leonardo called from the gate. "Keep moving, keep moving." The second glider run came from the east, corrected angle, and Carter put a grenade into its flight path from the M203 with the calm of someone solving an equation. The glider broke off trailing smoke. Michelangelo had 2 of the remaining villagers, an elderly man who couldn't run and a child who wouldn't leave him, moving toward the gate with a hand on each of their backs, his body between them and the direction of fire, and O'Neill made a point of seeing this clearly because some things deserve to be seen clearly. 5 villagers. 4. 3. Yara was last. Of course she was last. She'd organized everyone else through with the quiet authority of a woman who'd decided her people mattered more than her survival so many times it had become her default state. Daniel got her moving with a hand on her arm and words O'Neill couldn't hear over the sound of a third glider making its approach. 2 villagers. 1. Yara through the gate. Go! O'Neill shouted, and the team moved, Carter, Daniel, Tilk in sequence, the practiced extraction of people who had done this enough times to do it without thinking. Leonardo pushed Donatello through ahead of himself. Michelangelo went. Raphael held the perimeter until O'Neill grabbed his shoulder, and they went through together, as the third glider's cannon fire crossed the clearing in a line of superheated earth that reached the gate's position approximately 1 second after the event horizon took them. The SGC gate room was chaos organized by training. 214 villagers from P3X774 occupied every available space on level 19 and the corridor beyond. Sitting, standing, holding children, holding each other, making the sounds of people who had been genuinely terrified and had come through the other side of it. Medical teams moved through the crowd with the systematic calm of Dr. Fraser's department running at capacity. Gate technicians managed the flow up the ramp stairs. MPs held perimeter with weapons holstered because there was nothing here that required weapons. O'Neill stood at the base of the ramp and counted his people. All present. He sat down on the bottom ramp step, which was undignified and he didn't care, and let the gate room noise wash over him for 30 seconds before Hammond appeared at his shoulder. Apophis's fleet is holding position at P3X774, Hammond said. No pursuit. The gate address is burned for now, we won't be going back. The village? Hammond was quiet for a moment. The fleet began orbital bombardment 4 minutes after our gate closed. O'Neill looked at the floor. The village. The stone buildings, the well, the silver-bark trees, was gone. 214 people were alive because they'd moved fast enough and held the gate long enough. The planet they'd lived on for generations was, in all practical terms, gone. That was the mathematics of the gold, and O'Neill had never found a way to make it balance. Leonardo sat down on the ramp step beside him. Not close. Just near. We got them out, Leonardo said. We got them out, O'Neill agreed. They sat with that for a moment the way you sat with things that were true and insufficient simultaneously. Apophis won't stop, Leonardo said. No. Because of us. Because of what we are to him. Partly. O'Neill looked at him. He wouldn't have stopped anyway. This is what he does. We just gave him a new direction to do it in. He paused. That's not on you. Leonardo nodded slowly, with the look of a man filing something away to examine more honestly later when the operational adrenaline had cleared. It was a look O'Neill recognized from mirrors. Across the gate room, Donatello was in quiet conversation with Carter beside the DHD access panel, both of them apparently already processing the wormhole extension modification with the mutual absorption of people who had found the specific frequency on which they communicated best. Michelangelo was cross-legged on the floor with 3 of the P3X774 children arranged around him in the posture of an audience, doing something with his hands that was making them laugh. Raphael stood at the gate room's far wall beside Tilk, and they were not talking, which O'Neill had come to understand meant they were communicating perfectly. Hammond stopped beside O'Neill and looked at the gate room's organized chaos for a long moment. The NID has submitted a formal request to have our guests transferred to their custody for evaluation, he said mildly. No, O'Neill said. That was my answer as well. Hammond straightened his jacket. I've asked Jacob to continue monitoring Apophis's fleet movements. The TALK-RA have 3 intelligence assets tracking his response to today's operation. He paused. We'll need to discuss what comes next. Yes, sir, O'Neill said. Hammond nodded and moved away. O'Neill looked at the gate, cold now, dormant, the iris closed and locked. Somewhere on the other side of the network Apophis had 3 Hatak vessels and a new obsession and the particular patience of a being who measured grudges in decades. In the SGC database, a new file had been opened that afternoon. Classification level, above top secret. Designation, Operation Shellback. Contents: 4 names, 4 physiological profiles, 1 gymnasium footage file, and a mission record that was already longer than most SG teams accumulated in a year. At the bottom of the file, in Hammond's handwriting, a single line, recommended for full operational integration pending review. O'Neill looked at Leonardo. Leonardo was already looking at the gate. "Same time tomorrow?" O'Neill said. Leonardo almost smiled. "What's the address?" They had come through a gate they hadn't chosen, into a war they hadn't known existed, and they had not flinched. 4 warriors from the hidden places of one world had stood on alien ground, moved through gold fire, and brought 214 people home through a wormhole that had no business staying open. The SGC had seen remarkable things walk through its gate. It had rarely seen anything walk through with this quality of quiet, undemonstrative commitment. The kind that didn't require recognition because it wasn't performed for an audience. Apophis was alive, his fleet intact, his obsession with them now a documented strategic variable in Earth's ongoing survival calculus.